there's this great irony, right? As soon as your app is reminding you to do something, that's now an extrinsic motivator. And so intrinsic motivation is extremely difficult to tap into. With that said, we do try as hard as we can to tap into intrinsic motivation because, there is something magical about it. Reminding people of their goals that they've set themselves can be helpful. One approach for doing this is providing them with some limited choice or choice with constraints.
Welcome to the MindTech podcast, where we dive deep into the unsolved problems in mental health with the founders, investors, and experts building technology to solve them. In this episode, we meet a digital product leader who translates behavioral science into health products that achieve lasting behavior change. Aline Holzwarth has earned many impressive stripes as an applied behavioral scientist, including behavioral science lead in the health AI team at Apple, head of behavioral science at Pattern Health, a digital health platform motivating patients to engage with their care, and the principal of the Center for Advanced Hindsight at Duke University, where she redesigned systems to help people make better health decisions. Today, she and her team run Nuance, harnessing the best of behavioral science to achieve scalable behavior change in technology-enabled products. Listen to learn Arlene's take on the most effective incentives that mental health apps can give their users to achieve lasting behavior change, how to leverage a user's intrinsic motivation to close the gap between intention and action, and the 3 most relevant behavioral science concepts to mental health technology. Let's dive in. Welcome, Aline. It's an honor to have you here. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. How about yourself?
Wonderful, thank you. It's an early start for me, but as I said, it's going to inject my day with energy and enthusiasm, so I'm excited.
Yeah, it's tough to find an acceptable overlap between Australia and the US. I've definitely struggled with that in the past.
Yeah, there's literally a very small window in the day, but I'm glad we made it work because you have a wealth of wonderful experiences that I think have so much to contribute to this kind of discussion. In particular, you've worn so many hats as a behavioral scientist. You've been a researcher, a product manager, the director of a startup lab, a consultant, and the behavioral science lead in health AI at Apple. So my first question to you, which is quite nice because it gives a good little intro there, is which role do you feel you were most able to make an impact on outcomes in behavioral health?
Impact on outcomes. That's great. I definitely like so you mentioned a pretty wide variety of things. There's also an evolution over time, right? So I really kind of started out on the more academic side and working like very much with experimentation and research. And that was a lot of fun. I love running experiments. But I think to your point, the impact, I was not feeling the impact very much in the exclusive research world where it was so academically focused. And while you have the freedom to just kind of test whatever you want, it's not very clear that that's going to lead to anything, right? And so that's why now I consider myself an applied behavioral scientist, where if I'm doing testing, it is to achieve some purpose, to understand like how does this actually impact outcomes in the real world. And it's often not so much a lab study that I'm running when I do research now. It's something it's really out in the world with an organization's real customers and so on. And so I've really moved more towards the product space now. And that I would say feels much more impactful if you can really use the behavioral insights, if you can really leverage them in your work. And it's tough to, it doesn't always work to do that. But I think that that my work as a scientifically informed product designer, which is sort of sometimes what I call it. I call myself all kinds of different things as well. So you're gonna have trouble getting any sort of consistency out of me. But yeah, I think that is the product world is where it feels more real, more tangible, and that people's lives are actually being impacted.
I guess the development arc that you mentioned there is necessary in a way, going from academic research, learning about everything that the field has done up until this point, feeling like you're at the leading edge of what's the latest research, and then being able to take that step into, okay, now let's apply that in the real world with teams and creating products. So yeah, I like the evolution spin that you put on that.
But I don't want anyone to go away under the impression that I have sort of left research behind, right? Because research is so important within product, and that's really like doing experimentation and iterating on your product design. That is really critical to getting it right. You can say, oh, I've designed this product with all of the literature and behavioral science in mind, but until you actually go out and understand the nuance in your particular context with your particular users, you don't really know. You don't really have any idea that the thing that you've created is actually better than what you would have created without that, behavioral science lens, for example.
Yeah, I guess so much of behavioral science is experimentation, even more than in other fields, particularly with real world experiments. And I think there's so many variables that you try and control. It can never feel perfect, but that's almost why the experiments are that much more worthwhile doing, because it's such a hard field to get a result that you can rely on. So you have to do so many experiments so that you can look at all of them, and then you can have a bit more of a reliable result, really. So I guess my next question to you then is, why does the intersection of behavioral science, which includes all of these experiments into human nature, and technology have so much potential to improve behavioral health?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, part of it is just that the world that we live in now is just so technology is so ubiquitous. Everyone is walking around carrying these perfect little intervention devices, their smartphones and their smartwatches, all of their the different technologies, but that we can access people in ways that was never true before. If you look at behavioral science research, even like 20 years ago, it was like, people had pagers that or like timers that beeped and they'd have to do some sort of diary study and like really pretty lame. And that was just in the research world. In the applied world, there was almost nothing. So the opportunity to just be at the right place, which is in someone's pocket at the right time, is just tremendous, and that was not always true. And so I think technology has changed so much just in terms of that opportunity, and a lot of people are leveraging that opportunity, some better than others, but yeah, I think that's a big part of it.
So it's the data feeding the insights, as well as the tools to be able to facilitate that behavior change.
Absolutely, yeah.
I guess one of the most fascinating aspects of behavioral science to me is motivating people to make the right choices by giving them the right incentives. And I think in a
Hmm.
world where incentives feel quite misaligned between those who are in power and those who aren't in power, I think behavioral science has a great contribution to make here. But specifically in mental health and mental health technologies, how do you think we can incentivize people to not only engage, but also cultivate a lasting commitment to any tools that facilitate them taking care of their mental health?
Yeah, interesting. I think so. So you talk about incentives. Incentives are one way of facilitating behavior change, but there's a whole toolbox out there, right? And I think that even before you get to incentives, you can say what are most digital health companies, for example, doing in order to engage their users and get them to to fill that intention action gap where people say, I would like to do XYZ for my health, but I don't actually do that. And I sort of think of it as these different levels of intervention, and the first one is what most companies do, which is very, very basic. It's extremely popular way of and you almost wouldn't call it an intervention. It's providing information, right? This is the basic tools, basic information. It fully relies on the user to take charge and to set it up, and that tends to not be very effective because people already know they should get enough sleep and They know which stress management techniques would help. And I don't exclusively work in mental health, but they know that they shouldn't be using their phone right before bed. They should limit their screen time and so on. And so providing people with that information, even when the information is something like tracking your screen time, it just isn't that effective. Like my screen time is tracked. I'm sure that your screen time is tracked. And do we ever actually look at the chart to see how we're doing? But then you can go a level up from that. You start to get a little more sophisticated with insights and trends. This is definitely gaining popularity within digital health companies. So you can tell someone, oh, like, hey, you tend to spend less time outdoors when you spend more time on social media. And so, mostly intuitive types of things, but it's personalized, and it gets at the it gets at the heart of what's going on, and might have a slightly larger impact on what's going on there. And then you have the third level of behavior change facilitation, and this is sort of where the applied behavioral scientist lives and tries to get digital health companies to adopt this sort of mindset or this approach to product design. And here you can you can actually go a step further. You can take an active role in helping users carry out their best intentions and really cross that intention action gap, helping people utilize those tools more effectively. So like suggesting or placing a limit on screen time rather than just saying, here's what you're doing, here's what you could do, right? Imposing consequences for exceeding that limit that they've agreed upon. And like you said, incentives, right? And incentives don't have to be, I think a lot of the time when you talk about incentives, you think of financial incentives, right? But I think like one of my favorite types of incentives is actually a social incentive. How can you get people, create accountability buddies, match people up, and you create some kind of a commitment, and then your best friend or your sibling or whoever holds you accountable to that commitment. That can be one of the most effective forms of reaching your goals.
That is a great step-by-step approach of how to elevate one's approach to behavior change. And incentives, yeah, it's beyond just financial. The social one's really, really interesting. Of course, even then, finding out what people value and what they need is the first step, really, to be able to know how to incentivize them. So I guess a way of doing that first with these tools would be the most logical place to start. Also, it's interesting. You can make the best external rewards in the world, but the power of intrinsic motivation trumps all of those things, right? So in your work, do you ever get the chance to foster that sense of intrinsic motivation beyond external rewards?
It's really tough because as soon as there's this great irony, right? As soon as your app is reminding you to do something, that's now an extrinsic motivator. And so intrinsic motivation is extremely difficult to tap into. And there are also areas where people are not that intrinsically motivated, for example, to take their medication, or so if you're not in great shape, then exercise. If you don't enjoy exercise, like you're not intrinsically motivated to exercise until you've already built an exercise habit, and sometimes you need some extrinsic motivators in order to get there. With that said, that we do try as hard as we can to tap into intrinsic motivation, because there is something magical about it, and reminding people of their goals that they've set themselves can be helpful. And getting there is often, you have to kind of lead people to form their goals, because people don't always have fully formulated goals in mind. And so one approach for doing this is providing them with some limited choice, or choice with constraints. So essentially you can ask someone, what's your reason for being here today in this health app? And maybe it's to improve my heart health, or maybe it's maybe it's because I want to connect with others, or so like whatever that thing is, giving people some options, but not too many options, finding that right balance between enough choice, but not overload in choice. That can really help people both be more clear themselves on what their motivations are, and then choose something, and then help them reflect on what that thing was later. And you can kind of, once you've once you've led them to their motivation and their goal and so on, facilitating that process, because it's hard to do on your own. Setting goals is not easy, and that's part of the reason that we don't do it. But once you've sort of led people down that path, then you can help them set commitments if they would like to, and remind them of the reason that they wanted to do that thing in the first place.
That's wonderful. So connecting people with those parts of themselves, that their motivations that are serving them well, right? So even though we can't make people choose necessarily what they're intrinsically motivated by, we can help them reconnect with what those drivers are, so that it can be in full force with enacting that behavior change. Very
Yeah,
interesting.
and this is a somewhat common step in an onboarding process, right? If you think about different health apps that are out there, you go in and you say, what do you want to achieve? Why do you want to achieve that? And then I think maybe the missed step that really could amplify one's intrinsic motivation is actually saving that information and then presenting it back to people. I I see this information collected all the time. Do I see it utilized? Like, almost never. I almost never am
Mm,
told, like, oh, do you remember how you said this is what you said? How can we go the next step towards doing that?
yeah. Another interesting challenge for mental health and behavioral health apps in particular is, as you may very well know, user retention and engagement. So many um, download the app and have those good intentions, but as you mentioned, not only helping people make that gap between intention and action, but keeping them there, keeping them taking action is very tough, particularly for these behavioral health and mental health apps. So, from your understanding of behavioral science, what do you think are the key factors in creating digital tools that maximize retention and engagement
Mm.
for users?
Yeah. I think part of it is getting to a higher level of intervention. So many of these apps are just, you go in and it's got your dashboard of educational materials, and that's just not really what people want. Sometimes they say that that's what they want, but it's not actually what they want. No one, you have to provide something useful and valuable to users. And one way of doing that, I think, is by bringing in their connections to the real world. And this is tough, right? You have to actually convince them to invite a friend, or set up a challenge with someone else. But as soon as you have that tie to their real world relationships, that is so much stronger than any sort of commitment to some dumb app that and when you're in the
Mm,
moment, you would think it's a really great idea to meditate every day, and then tomorrow you're like, what? I don't actually want to do that. So, but if you can establish a commitment when someone is in that frame, when they're in that moment of being motivated, and then help them hang on to that in the tomorrowland where they're no longer motivated, that can be really helpful.
I think that also plays a role in helping people connect offline as well, learning
Absolutely.
learning what the app has to offer in terms of the information, and basically telling them what they kind of maybe already know, but just bringing it to their attention, and then helping them create accountability systems in the real world, so that they can be held accountable, but also feel connected with the real world, and engage in that space as well.
And
Very interesting.
those real world connections are probably going to have a greater boost to their well-being than anything that the app is getting them to do anyway, right? Those 2 minutes of meditation a day, like that's not going to make as much of a difference as increasing the time and the quality of your relationships outside of the app. So if you can do that, like, you're already winning.
Absolutely. Can you think of any examples of products that have been able to do this very well?
Part of the problem is that I believe many digital health companies are so focused on engagement within their technology that they miss out on the fact that the greater benefit is being outside. And they also equate the value of interacting online, so your sort of social media type of interactions, with being as valuable as offline relationships, and that's just not the case. Of course, there are ways to use social media in and impact people positively. So, for example, when it supplements real world interactions as opposed to replacing them, if you can, but it really gets back to enhancing your real life relationships rather than replacing them, substituting them. So, it's we talked a little bit about incentives. You can think about incentives in the product world as well, right? If you're a company and you have investors and they're the KPIs that are important are your monthly visitors and how much time people spend on your app. Well, that's inherently flawed, and I think that a lot of digital health products fall prey to this, when what they should be doing is helping people increase and improve the quality of their external relationships.
I agree. Perhaps that's a space that is pretty open and in need of innovation then, which I'd love to see happen.
Yeah, yeah.
Which because in behavioral science there's so many different laws of human behavior that you guys have, right? Like there's all these biases, there's all these laws, right?
Yes, there are many theories and frameworks and long lists of biases and heuristics. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, yeah. Well, um, that's one of the things that behavioral science is famous for, right? Because you can tell
Hmm.
these fascinating stories of experiments that demonstrate some of these laws in action. And my question is, what do you think are some of the most consequential laws
Hmm.
in this way to designing products for behavioral health? And they may be those three that you have developed yourself, but just putting some of those heuristics and biases and laws in the context of behavioral health here, which ones do you think are most pivotal?
I think especially when we're talking about products, the most useful concepts to keep in mind are the intention action gap. I think that's probably number one, because so often you come across the assumption that users will do what's in their best interest, and that's just simply not the case, right? We see it time and time again, and this is why we have such problems in health, right? It's because people know what they should do and they're not doing that. So I think that's extremely important. The second, I think, is just the limited attention of users. I think I see a lot of onboarding processes and digital health apps with 100 steps and long questionnaires and all this friction to signing up, to getting to where they want to be, and it feels very company centric rather than user centric. So I have a tagline which is product for humans, and it really just gets at this, like, designing for humans and how humans behave and how they react and what motivates them and so on. And I think that understanding that the perspective of your users is not necessarily the perspective of your company is a really important step to doing so. And then lastly, just friction and fuel in general, right? So thinking about what are all the barriers that a user encounters to getting to their target behavior, and how can you decrease that friction in order to get them there more quickly or at all. And then thinking about fuel in terms of what are those motivating factors that make the behavior or the path to the behavior more appealing, easier to do, and so on. And so I think that's if I had to choose, there are so many, but those I would say are the top. In my intro to applied behavioral science, those are the ones I would highlight.
Okay, those are very practical, and I think they could go a long way in informing better product designs for humans and our human nature. But when these products are released and put out there and people are using them, How do you measure the success of
Hmm.
these behavioral health interventions?
Oh man. So it depends, right? It depends what your
Yeah, of
lens
course.
is. When you're in a products team, you have the bottom line to report to, and that's you don't forget about that. But at the
Mhm.
same time, you also have to keep an eye on your long-term outcomes. And if your users are not achieving their goals, that they're not going to stick with you in the long term. So even if you have, a huge amount of signups and retention in the short term, that might actually not last in the long term if people are ultimately not reaching their goals. And so what I really like to think about is Heather Cole Lewis is a behavioral scientist who has this big E and little e framework. And so she talks about the big E being the E in engagement, right? The big E is, are users engaging in the actual thing that you want them to do, and say it's like toothbrushing, for example. Are they brushing their teeth? And then the little e is, are they using the digital health tool that is, it has these behavioral interventions in it that is designed to help them brush their teeth. And so here your product is this app, and you're measuring, how long are they in the app, are they checking off the boxes and playing the games that are around toothbrushing or watching the videos. You really ultimately care about the big E there of toothbrushing, not so much of the how long they're in the app, even if your
Mm.
incentives tell you otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges for these little e companies, because
Yeah.
when we want to help people change their behavior in a healthy way, that's that's a positive, ethical stance. But we also don't want them to become reliant on these technologies. We would like to help them develop self-reliance. So again, it's a kind of like incentive thing where the better your intervention is, the shorter amount of time and the longer lasting the implications of it in the person's life. So,
Mm-hmm.
how do we make sure that the companies and the users are well aligned there? And
Yeah.
is there a way of facilitating long term engagement without having such a mode of reliance on that technology?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's tough, right? And I think
Mm.
part of it is a measurement problem. It's often much easier to measure little e than it is to measure big E. But if you can find a way to measure big E and incorporate that into your financial models and show, look, this is really what success means to us, then I think you can start to get there. Um, but it's not easy. I'll just say that again. I
Yeah.
think there's still a conflict to overcome.
Hmm. Okay. I think this intention action gap is fascinating because, as a doctor, and for any clinician or healthcare professional listening, they will very much resonate with that concept of, you know, we work so hard to help patients take action in the right direction, but ultimately we can't do it for them, and we can't get too attached to them taking that action, because we have to just be happy that we've done our bit, and it's up to them. They have free will to do what they want. But it's one of the biggest barriers to good health, really. And I wonder, in terms of digital behavioral health interventions, what you've found are some of the most consequential barriers towards people making that leap from intention to action, and how you've designed solutions to overcome these.
Decreasing friction tends to be the most effective barrier remover in terms of getting someone in terms of closing that intention action gap. And I think that is evidenced by the the relative efficacy of something like defaults, right? If you change the default, that can have an incredible impact on someone's behavior. If you just like people just go towards the status quo, the easiest choice most often. So unless they have a strong aversion or a habit in the other direction, um, changing the default or reducing friction can is probably the more impactful thing to do rather than something like, increasing fuel, making it more fun, or, adding games and such to the thing. If you make it, seamless and invisible, it's going to happen.
Yeah, definitely the first step is to remove the friction. Then you can think about adding fuel, right? Because if you make the most elaborate, gamified, enjoyable, fun, animated experience, if
Oh
there's
yeah.
friction, then it's just going to undercut all of that.
It
So
has to be so much fun in
yeah,
order to overcome the
yeah,
friction.
yeah, yeah. I mean, obviously both are ideal, but I get your point about friction is actually the top priority, and then you can
Yeah.
think about how to build on top of that. Okay. What do you think are the most unmet needs in mental health, and how do you envision emerging technologies serving these needs?
Yeah, interesting. So I would back up first and just say, when we talk about mental health, I think we're making a mistake by just thinking about the mind when we're talking about mental health. I think so often we forget that the mind is in many ways just an illusion, right? Where it comes out of the manifestation of our physical bodies and our neurons and so on. And I think that there's this false dichotomy between mental and physical health, right? And so often when we're talking about mental health, we're just thinking about, things like, meditation and going out in nature, and really there's some very compelling research out there showing that, one of the best ways to feel better mentally is to do something physical, right? So exercise, it's shown over and over, can be more effective than antidepressants in some clinical populations that are diagnosed with depression. And so I would urge the mental health community to remember that our physical bodies are such an integral and important part of our minds and our mental health and our well-being and so on. And a lot of the ways, honestly, that we think about improving mental health, changing your mindset, reframing things, back to meditating for 2 minutes a day, 2 or 3 minutes or so on. Those are actually not all that effective, especially when you compare it to something like going on a daily walk. And so I would say, you know, maybe the unmet need is bringing in the physical need in order to amplify mental health, and maybe not thinking of these as discrete and separate functions.
Of course, our mind comes from physiological processes. We're not quite sure how consciousness emerges from that just
Yeah.
yet, but it is a phenomenon. And I think your point there of don't overlook the importance of investing in physical health in order to improve mental health is is an important one, and it's a fresh one to bring to this discussion. So yeah, that's very very interesting, and hopefully the emerging technologies in this space can build that into their service as well, not just focusing on the psychological aspects directly, but indirectly improving the psychological by improving the physical.
I will say one more thing
Mhm.
to the topic of unmet needs, and I think that often the emphasis is so much placed on individuals and, like, your own, you know taking this burden upon yourself that you must fix your mental health. And so many of digital health apps are exactly that. They're like, okay, you're not feeling well, what are you doing wrong? And so it's this completely unfair expectation that you can change everything in the world that is wrong, that is really put you in this place anyway. Maybe there are some things that you're responsible for, but there's so many environmental, political factors that, can bring people down. If you think about our social structures and inequality, like, really, there's so much work that needs to be done in terms of rebuilding systems, whether it's to facilitate social connection or get rid of systemic inequities, that I think it's unfair to place so much of that burden on the individual when really there's so much work that needs to be done in the world.
Yeah, hopefully technology has a role to play in fostering that compassion for the users, not just telling them where they have been on
Yeah,
their phone for too long, or
exactly.
when they haven't slept long enough, but also maybe saying, hey, this stuff in the world is very stressful. Let's just take a moment to just explain how naturally this is going to cause stress and take a toll on your
Hmm.
how you're thinking and
Yeah,
feeling. Mm.
both acknowledging the role of those other factors, but also maybe changing those factors, doing what we can in
Yeah,
other
no, yeah,
ways.
yeah,
And maybe
true.
that's outside the scope of our of our digital health products, but still nonetheless important.
Yeah, it does have consequences, so it's definitely relevant. I just hope, um, yeah, the people who are actually capable of making changes there are engaged in this kind of discourse, but I am slightly doubtful.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
I guess I'm with you there.
Yeah. Okay, so my last question, which brings to an end to what's been an extremely insightful discussion, is what are you working on right now that excites you the most?
Oh boy. I mean, I would say I'm most excited about the work that I'm doing with Nuance. So with some of my close, very talented behavioral science colleagues, we've created the consultancy, and yeah, we're trying to figure out how to really work with organizations and specifically product teams to apply some of these insights and make their products much better and scientifically informed, maybe do some research, but not pushing research on people who are not ready for it, but certainly finding ways to make more effective products using behavioral science.
And infusing behavioral science into an unlimited number of products through this agency, right? Rather than being just at one company working on one product.
Exactly.
That's
Exactly.
pretty
That's
cool.
that's the goal, is that we can have a much bigger impact by doing a little bit everywhere, sprinkling
Yeah.
ourselves throughout the product universe.
Yeah, it reminds me of a discussion I had with a professor at the Imperial College London, Professor Raphael Calvo, in one of the previous episodes. His whole philosophy is to implement well-being in the design of every technology, whether that
Yes.
be Microsoft Office or
Mm-hmm.
Gmail. Um,
Yeah.
being able to prioritize well-being there and everywhere may just have uh, a massive impact compared to expecting people to rely on one Hail Mary app on their phone that is going to suddenly take them from poor mental health to great mental health. And
Yeah.
it's similar to what you've just described there, with being able to make these contributions in a much more of a multi-pronged approach and in so many different angles, which ultimately create a system that is
Mm-hmm.
elevated in terms of its human-centered design. So that's awesome.
Wonderful. Yeah, no, that sounds great. I would love to hear how he's how he's improving well-being through Microsoft Office.
Yeah.
That
He's
sounds
got some
very
ideas
difficult.
which are very very cool. But
Awesome.
yeah, it's I think it would be relevant particularly for yourself because of how you are not limited to any one product, but open to
Yeah.
bringing what you value to so many different products, which is fantastic. So, Aileen, it has been an absolute pleasure to learn about the incredible work that you continue to do in translating behavioral concepts to tangible product designs. Awesome stuff. So, for everyone listening, how can people support and follow your work?
Hmm. Well, I suppose find me on LinkedIn. I have a new series in Forbes, where I interview product leaders and talk about how they are incorporating behavioral design in their product decisions. So follow that, read those articles, and yeah, generally I'm around. I'm on the internet.
Cool. All of that will be linked in the description. And yeah, I look forward to keeping very much in the loop of all that stuff as well.
Awesome. Same.
Thank you so much for the wonderful discussion. It's been great.
Thank you so much for having me.
Every startup that has featured on MindTech is solving a mental health problem with a technology-enabled solution. To get a full picture of all the problems these startups are working on and all the solutions they're offering, sign up to the email list in the description to access the MindTech Matrix. This is the first visual representation of how mental health problems are being matched by innovative solutions. You'll also be updated whenever there's a new episode and get early access to test some of the products that are discussed in the podcast. Everything you need is in the description.